There are stories that stop you, not because they are dramatic, not because something explodes or breaks or falls apart in a spectacular way, but because they are so deeply, quietly human that something inside you just goes still. This is one of those stories. And before we go any further, if you are someone who believes that love does not have an expiration date, that it is never too late to find the people you lost, please hit that like button right now and subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly these moments. What happened on that Family Feud stage in the spring of 2024 did not just make Steve Harvey cry in front of 50 million people. It reminded every single one of us what we are actually made of. Stay with us. You need to hear this one all the way through. Every family carries a wound that nobody talks about at the dinner table. The kind that lives in the quiet spaces between sentences, in the photographs that are turned face down in drawers, in the names that used to be said out loud and then one day simply stopped being said. For the Turner family of Nashville, Tennessee, that wound had a name. His name was James. And for 52 years, his mother Dorothy had carried that name in the part of her chest where breathing sometimes gets hard for no medical reason that any doctor could explain. Dorothy Turner was 74 years old. She had the kind of face that had once been beautiful in a sharp, striking way, and had aged into something even better, dignified, deep-lined, fully lived in, the face of a woman who had seen things and kept going. She wore her silver hair natural and close, and she had the habit, when she was thinking hard about something, of pressing her lips together and looking slightly to the left, as if the answer to whatever she was wrestling with might be found just over her shoulder. Her daughter Renee, who had organized the Family Feud application almost entirely on her own, without telling her mother the real reason until the last possible moment, had noticed that habit her whole life. She had seen her mother do it at kitchen tables and hospital waiting rooms and church pews and grocery store checkout lines. She had seen her do it at 3 in the morning when Dorothy thought everyone else was asleep, sitting at the window with a cup of tea gone cold, pressing her lips together, looking just to the left. Renee knew what her mother was looking for. She had known since she was 7 years old and found, tucked inside a shoebox on the top shelf of the hallway closet, a small photograph of a baby boy and a birth certificate with a name on it that her mother had never once spoken aloud in Renee's presence. She had put the photograph back exactly as she found it and never said a word. But she had never forgotten it either. Some things a child sees and quietly carries for 30 years, waiting for the right moment to do something about it. The story, as Dorothy eventually told it to Renee when Renee was old enough and the moment was finally right, which turned out to be a Tuesday evening on a front porch in Nashville with 2 glasses of sweet tea and the sun going down orange and slow, began in 1972. Dorothy was 22 years old. She was not married. The man she had loved and trusted had left when she told him she was pregnant, gone so cleanly and completely that it was as if he had simply decided to exist in a different version of the world, one where Dorothy and the child she was carrying did not figure. Her family, devout and deeply concerned with what the neighbors would think, had arranged everything quietly and quickly. The baby would be adopted. It had already been decided before Dorothy had fully processed that she was going to be a mother. By the time James was born, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair, the loudest cry the nurse said she had heard all week, he was already spoken for. Dorothy held him for 11 minutes. She had counted. She had been counting in one way or another ever since. She had gone on to build a life. She married a good man named Robert who knew about James from the beginning and loved her anyway. She had Renee, and then Marcus, and then baby Cora who came late and unexpected and brought the whole family so much joy it almost felt like a correction, like the universe tipping something back into balance. Robert died of a heart attack when Dorothy was 61, and she had grieved him with the same quiet, steady determination she brought to everything. She was a grandmother 4 times over. She taught Sunday school for 23 years. She made the best sweet potato pie in 3 counties, a fact that was not disputed by anyone who had ever tasted it. She had a full life, a good life, a life that was genuinely hers, and yet, 52 years is a long time to wonder if someone is warm enough, if they had good people around them. If they ever got curious about where that particular laugh came from, or why they tilted their head a certain way, or what it meant that they sometimes felt like a piece of themselves was located somewhere they couldn't quite reach. 52 years is a long time to look just to the left and wait. Renee had found James 18 months before the Family Feud taping. It had taken a DNA testing service, 3 months of careful back and forth messages, 2 phone calls that left her crying in her car in the parking lot of a Target, and 1 very long conversation with her husband about what happened next. James Whitfield, he had been given the last name of the family who raised him, a couple from Cincinnati who by all accounts had been kind and present and good, was 52 years old, a retired postal worker, a grandfather of two, a man who coached Little League on weekends and grew tomatoes in his backyard and had, according to every person Renee spoke to who knew him, the exact same habit as his birth mother of pressing his lips together and looking slightly to the left when he was thinking hard about something. He had known he was adopted since he was 8. He had thought about searching for his birth family many times over the decades and had always stopped himself, not out of lack of want, but out of something more complicated. A fear, maybe, that the answer to why he had been given away was not one he was ready to receive. That the story behind those 11 minutes might be too heavy to carry on top of everything else he was already carrying. Renee had been the one to send the first message. She had rewritten it 11 times. The final version was 4 sentences long. It said, "I think you might be my brother. I'm not here to disrupt your life. I am here because our mother has been looking just to the left for 52 years, and I think it is time someone told her she can look straight ahead now. Please take whatever time you need." James had responded in 2 hours. His message was 3 sentences. It said, "I have been waiting for this my whole life and I didn't know it until right now. I would very much like to meet her. Tell me when." The Family Feud producers had heard a version of this story during the application process, not the full version, but enough to understand that something extraordinary was in motion. They had worked with Renee in the weeks leading up to the taping on a plan that was, in its simplicity, almost cruel in how effective it was. Dorothy would come on the show as a contestant, believing she was there to play a game with her family. She was not told that the producers had arranged for James to be in the building. She was not told that the moment she had counted in 11-minute increments for 52 years was approximately 40 feet away and moving closer with every passing minute. She knew none of it. She just thought she was going on a game show. She had worn her good blue dress and her pearl earrings and had told Renee 3 times in the car that she hoped she wouldn't embarrass herself by saying something silly on national television. The game itself, the actual Family Feud portion, was secondary to everyone in the room who knew what was coming. The Turner family played with warmth and humor. Dorothy turned out to be a natural, sharp and quick, with a dry wit that the audience responded to immediately. At one point she gave an answer so unexpectedly perfect that Steve Harvey stopped and looked at her with genuine delight and said, "Where have you been all my life?" And the audience went wild. Dorothy pressed her lips together and looked slightly to the left, and then smiled, slow and satisfied, in a way that said she knew exactly where she had been all her life, and most of it had been pretty good, actually. But Steve Harvey knew what was coming. He had been told before the taping. And if you watch the footage carefully, you can see something shifting in him during the game, a quality of attention that is slightly different from his usual hosting presence, a kind of held breath beneath the warmth and the jokes. He was watching Dorothy Turner the way you watch someone who is about to receive news that will change the geography of their life, looking for the right moment, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. When the game portion ended, Steve asked the family to stay on stage for a moment. Said there was something special he wanted to share with Dorothy before they wrapped up. He said it simply, without theatrics. Dorothy looked at him with that sharp, dignified face and said, "Something special, okay, should I be nervous?" Steve said very quietly, "No, Miss Dorothy, you should not be nervous, I promise you." He paused for just a moment. Then he said, "There is someone here today who has been wanting to meet you for a very long time, and someone who you have been waiting for even longer." Dorothy went completely still, the way a person goes still when their body understands something before their mind has caught up. Her hands, which had been folded loosely in front of her, tightened against each other. Her chin lifted slightly, and she pressed her lips together and looked not to the left this time. For the first time in longer than she could say, she looked straight ahead. James Whitfield walked out from the side of the stage. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, the kind of person who takes up space in a room in a way that feels comfortable rather than imposing. He was wearing a dark blue jacket that Renee had quietly suggested to him over text 3 days earlier, not mentioning that it was the same shade as their mother's dress. He walked slowly, because his legs were not entirely reliable at that moment. His hands were at his sides. His face was, there is really no other way to say this, the face of a man who had been looking for something his entire life and had just seen it from across a room and was walking toward it as fast as his suddenly uncertain legs would carry him. Dorothy made a sound. It was not a word. It was not a cry exactly. It was the sound a person makes when something they have held tightly for 52 years is suddenly released all at once. A sound that came from somewhere old and deep and private that she had never in all her years let out in public. She took one step toward him, then another. And then James Whitfield was across the stage, and his arms were around his mother, and Dorothy Turner buried her face in her son's shoulder and held on with the specific ferocity of a woman who had already let go once and was not going to do it again. The studio was not silent. It was the opposite. A sound came from that audience that was not applause exactly, not the usual enthusiastic clapping of a game show crowd, but something rower, something that happens when a room full of strangers witnesses a moment so private and so enormous that the only honest response is to stop pretending you are not affected. People were crying without being entirely sure when it had started. The production crew, people who had worked on this show for years and thought they had seen everything, stood at their stations and wept without embarrassment. Steve Harvey stood 2 feet away from this reunion and did not move. He had the microphone in his hand and absolutely nothing to say, which was, for Steve Harvey, a state so unusual that it became its own kind of testament to what he was witnessing. He watched Dorothy and James hold each other in the middle of that bright stage, and he pressed his fist to his mouth and he looked away for a moment, not because he didn't want to see it, but because something about it was almost too full, too complete, too much for even his experienced eyes to take in all at once. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. He just let them be wet, in front of the cameras and the audience and the 50 million people who would eventually watch this clip and understand exactly why. After a long time, long enough for the audience to settle from sobbing into the quieter, steadier emotion of people who have been changed by something, Dorothy and James finally stepped back slightly from each other, though neither fully let go. Dorothy looked at her son's face with the focused, searching intensity of a woman who has been memorizing something from a distance for half a century and is now, finally, close enough to see it clearly. She reached up with one hand and touched his cheek. Then she said in a voice that was steady in the way that very deep water is steady, "You have your grandfather's eyes, my daddy's eyes. I thought I'd never see those eyes again." James made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob or both at once. He covered her hand with his and held it against his face. Steve Harvey walked toward them slowly. When he reached them, he put one hand on James's shoulder and one on Dorothy's, and he stood there for a moment in the middle of that circle before he said anything. When he spoke, his voice had the particular texture of someone who is choosing words carefully because the moment deserves that care. "Miss Dorothy," he said, "I have been doing this job for a long time. I have stood on a lot of stages and I have been part of a lot of moments, and I want you to know something." He paused. "What I am looking at right now is the most powerful thing I have ever seen in my life, not on television, in my life." He paused again. 52 years is a long time to love someone you couldn't hold, and the fact that you held that love that long, the fact that it survived everything, all those years, all that silence, that's not just a story about you and James. That's a lesson for every single person in this room about what love actually is. He stopped. His jaw was tight with the effort of controlling his own voice. Love is not convenient. It doesn't ask permission. It just stays. And you stayed, Miss Dorothy, even when you couldn't, you stayed. Dorothy looked at Steve Harvey for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "I counted the minutes. When they took him, 11 minutes I held him. I have been counting ever since." Steve Harvey nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "you can stop counting now." And Dorothy Turner closed her eyes and let out a breath that seemed to carry 52 years of waiting with it, a breath so long and so complete that the whole room felt it. And when she opened her eyes, she looked directly at her son, and she smiled the smile of a woman who has finally, after all this time, looked straight ahead and found exactly what she was hoping would be there. The reunion did not end when the cameras stopped. James and Dorothy sat in the green room for 3 hours after the taping, just talking. Renee sat to one side and watched her mother and her brother discover each other with the same focused tenderness with which she had spent 30 years watching her mother look just to the left. They talked about Dorothy's father, James's grandfather, whose eyes James had apparently inherited so precisely that Dorothy kept stopping mid-sentence to just look at him, slightly undone all over again. They talked about James's adoptive parents, both gone now, both remembered with genuine gratitude by a man who understood that love is not diminished by multiplicity, that being loved by one family does not cancel out the love of another. They talked about tomatoes and sweet potato pie and the little league team James coached and the Sunday school class Dorothy had taught for 23 years. They talked about small things. The kind of small things that are actually enormous because they are the building blocks of knowing someone, and they had 52 years of building to do. Steve Harvey checked in on them before he left the building. He came into the green room without fanfare, poured himself a glass of water, sat down, and asked James about the tomatoes, not as a host, as a person. James told him about the specific variety he had been trying to grow for 3 seasons with limited success. And Steve Harvey, a man not known for his agricultural expertise, listened with complete attention and asked several follow-up questions. Dorothy watched this exchange and laughed, a real laugh, full and uncomplicated, and the sound of it made everyone in that room feel something that is difficult to name but easy to recognize. It feels like relief. It feels like the world briefly being exactly what it should be. In the weeks after the episode aired, the response was unlike anything the Family Feud team had seen since Priya Chandri's perfect round the year before. The clip of Dorothy and James's reunion was watched over 80 million times across platforms in the first week alone. But what moved the production team most was not the numbers. It was the messages. Thousands of them from adopted adults who had spent decades wondering. From birth parents who had spent decades counting their own private minutes. From siblings who had been separated and reunited. From people who had been carrying their own version of a shoebox on the top shelf of a hallway closet, and who, watching Dorothy finally look straight ahead, had decided that maybe it was time to do something about it. 3 DNA testing services reported a significant spike in new registrations in the week following the episode. One of the services contacted Renee directly to let her know that in the 30 days following the clip going viral, they had facilitated 19 reunions of separated family members, people who cited Dorothy and James's story as the reason they had finally taken the step they had been postponing for years. 19 families. 19 moments that happened in living rooms and hospital lobbies and airport arrivals' gates and front porches, private and unfilmed and completely real. 19 separate instances of someone finally being able to stop counting. Dorothy and James speak every day now. Not always for long, sometimes it's just a text, a photograph of the tomato plants finally doing well, a voice note sent at odd hours when one of them is thinking about the other and doesn't want to wait until a more reasonable time to say so. James drove to Nashville for Thanksgiving, 4 months after the taping. Dorothy made the sweet potato pie. James had 2 slices and said it was the best thing he had ever eaten, and Dorothy looked at him for a long moment and said, "Well, you've been missing it for 52 years. You've got a lot of catching up to do." James laughed. That laugh that strangers turn around to find in grocery stores, he had it too. Renee, sitting across the table, looked at her mother and her brother laughing the same laugh they had never known they shared, and felt something settle in her chest that had been quietly unsettled since she was 7 years old and found a photograph in a shoebox and put it back exactly as she found it. She didn't have to put it back anymore. Steve Harvey spoke about this story in an interview several months after it aired. He was asked what it meant to him personally, beyond the television moment. He was quiet for a moment before he answered. He said, "I think about Miss Dorothy counting those 11 minutes. I think about her doing that for 52 years. And I think, what do we do with our love when we can't put it anywhere? What do we do with it when the person it belongs to isn't there?" He paused. She kept it. She just kept it all that time, as clean and intact as the day it started. And the lesson in that, the lesson isn't about adoption or separation or any of the specific circumstances of her story. The lesson is just love keeps if you let it. Love keeps. He paused once more. "I am a better man for having been in that room. I mean that straight." And that right there is the thing worth carrying out of this story into your own life. Not the drama of the reunion, though it was genuinely one of the most moving things this show has ever witnessed. Not the viral numbers or the DNA testing statistics or the beautiful coincidence of the matching blue clothing. What is worth carrying is the simpler truth underneath all of it. That the love you have been holding carefully in whatever private version of a hallway closet you use for these things is still good. It has not expired. It is waiting exactly where you left it, as intact and as alive as the day it started, ready to be walked toward whenever you find the courage to move. 52 years is a long time. It is also, in the end, just the distance between one person and another. And some distances, no matter how long they have stretched, collapse in an instant the moment someone finally starts walking. If this story meant something to you today, and we believe it did, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story like Dorothy and James's. Share it with someone in your life who has been looking just to the left for too long. Because sometimes the most powerful thing one person can do for another is simply say, "It's okay to look straight ahead now. The person you've been waiting for might be closer than you think." Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.